There existed a particular cruelty in being rendered invisible by design rather than circumstance, systematic reduction of identity, through methods that operated beyond simple social neglect to encompass deliberate suppression of characteristics that might challenge comfortable assumptions about power and its appropriate distribution, according to established hierarchies that governed pack dynamics, through traditional assessment of worth and legitimate recognition of capability. For Lysan Ashworth, invisibility had been cultivated through years of careful management that maintained appearance of omega inadequacy, while concealing truth about heritage that possessed significance far beyond anything her current circumstances might suggest to observers whose understanding of power operated according to conventional parameters that failed to account for variables hidden through systematic suppression of dangerous potential. 23 years old and carrying presence that commanded attention through absence rather than assertion, she had learned to navigate pack dynamics that demanded strategic concealment of characteristics that might attract investigation from authorities whose interest could prove catastrophic for individual survival and community safety, that depended on maintaining comfortable assumptions about appropriate power distribution and legitimate sources of magical capability. The magic that had been woven into her existence operated beyond conscious awareness, while serving protective purposes that honored family survival through systematic elimination of evidence that might reveal bloodline connections to powers that had been officially eliminated during purges designed to prevent challenge to established order through unauthorized magical capability that threatened the territorial stability. Ancient seals that had been crafted by masters whose understanding of magical architecture transcended normal assessment had been designed to operate through subtle suppression rather than complete elimination, preserving potential while rendering it undetectable by conventional methods that authorities employed for identifying dangerous bloodlines that might challenge royal authority through inherited capabilities. The Ashworth lineage possessed connections to magical traditions that had been systematically eliminated during territorial consolidation, that prioritized conventional strength over mystical capability, while their survival had required complete concealment of heritage through methods that reduced apparent worth to levels that attracted no attention from political authorities whose suspicion might prove lethal. Her pack's treatment of her existence as burden rather than asset reflected successful maintenance of protective deception that honored family safety through individual sacrifice, systematic reduction of recognition that preserved community welfare, while ensuring that dangerous potential remained hidden from those whose investigation might reveal connections that challenged comfortable assumptions about eliminated bloodlines and appropriate magical capability. The gambling debt that would transfer her ownership to Alpha King represented convergence of pack desperation and individual vulnerability, circumstances that had been created through economic pressure that exceeded normal capacity for resolution, while providing opportunity for elimination of problematic individual, whose presence reminded leadership of obligations they preferred to forget through convenient disposal. Pack Alpha Raymond Darkwater had accumulated obligations that exceeded territorial resources through poor strategic decisions and systematic overextension of authority that had created financial pressure requiring resolution through methods that challenged traditional approaches to debt management while serving individual convenience over community welfare that might demand different mathematical assessment of appropriate sacrifice. The high-stakes card game that would determine territorial relationships had been arranged through diplomatic necessity that balanced competing claims against strategic advantage, while participants included authorities whose territorial control operated according to principles that honored demonstration over substance, immediate power over sustained capability that might serve longer-term objectives, through different approaches to resource management. Alpha King Darius Nightblade ruled territories that encompassed multiple pack regions according to principles that balanced practical necessity with systematic assessment of threat potential, while his authority operated through comprehensive understanding of magical dynamics that exceeded normal royal capability through inherited gifts that had been enhanced rather than suppressed during development. Years. His participation in high-stakes gambling represented political calculation that served multiple objectives through demonstration of authority, while providing opportunity for territorial expansion that honored strategic thinking over simple conquest, though his assessment of potential gains had been shaped by conventional understanding of pack resources rather than recognition of hidden variables that might exceed normal calculation. The evening that would witness transfer of ownership according to gambling results would test whether systematic concealment could withstand direct exposure to royal authority, whose magical capability operated beyond normal assessment, to encompass detection methods that might reveal suppressed potential through proximity that challenge protective measures designed to prevent exactly such investigation. Ancient magic that had been woven into protective concealment possessed limitations that operated according to circumstances rather than absolute security, while sustained exposure to authority whose capability exceeded normal parameters might prove sufficient for penetrating barriers that had been designed to resist conventional investigation, but had not accounted for comprehensive magical assess, meant that honored intuition alongside systematic analysis. Tonight, mathematics would be recalculated according to evidence rather than assumption. Concealment would be tested against investigation that operated beyond conventional parameters. Apparent worthlessness would encounter authority that possessed capability for recognizing value, that transcended surface assessment while serving strategic objectives that might benefit from acquisition of resource. Whose significance exceeded initial calculation. The Omega who had learned to make herself invisible would discover whether protective suppression could withstand examination by authority whose magical capability operated beyond normal limitations, while the king whose territorial control depended on comprehensive assessment of potential threats would encounter challenge to conventional evaluation through individual whose presence might reveal variables that challenged comfortable assumptions about eliminated bloodlines and appropriate power distribution. In recognition that single evening might determine whether decades of protective concealment had preserved safety or merely delayed inevitable discovery, forces would converge according to principles that honored authentic capability over performed inadequacy, while testing whether systematic suppression could contain power that possessed significance beyond anything normal assessment might suggest. Through conventional evaluation of Omega worth and appropriate recognition of magical potential, some secrets required revelation to serve their intended purposes, while some concealment that had been designed to preserve safety might prove inadequate when confronted by authority whose capability exceeded protective measures that had been crafted according to assumptions about investigation methods that might prove insufficient for circumstances that demanded comprehensive assessment rather hand traditional evaluation of worth and magical significance. Before we begin, remember to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications. Every day, a new story awaits you. Now, let us begin. The Thunder's Rest Tavern possessed atmosphere that mixed legitimate business with activities that operated beyond official oversight, establishment where territorial authorities conducted negotiations that required neutral ground, while participants included individuals whose presence might prove problematic for formal diplomatic venues that demanded accountability according to established protocols and conventional recognition of appropriate behavior. Smoke from expensive tobacco created haze that softened harsh edges, while providing concealment for expressions that might reveal strategic thinking during high-stakes negotiations, while amber light from crystal fixtures cast shadows that allowed participants to maintain privacy about reactions that might compromise bargaining positions or reveal weakness that could be exploited through tactical advantage. Alpha King Darius Nightblade occupied central position at polished oak table that had witnessed countless negotiations involving territorial boundaries and resource allocation, his presence commanding attention through combination of royal authority and systematic cultivation of strategic awareness that had been developed through years of governance, requiring comprehensive assessment of threat potential and appropriate response to challenging circumstances. Around him, assembled pack leaders represented territories that spanned significant geographical regions, while their individual authority operated according to principles that honored traditional hierarchy, supplemented by political calculation about appropriate recognition of royal power and strategic necessity for maintaining beneficial relationships with ultimate territorial authority, whose decisions affected regional prosperity and security arrangements. The stakes, announced Baron Klaus Ironwood, with tone that carried weight of formal arbitration despite casual environment that had been selected for negotiations, represent territorial claims that affect multiple pack boundaries while including resource allocation that serves strategic objectives for participants whose authority depends on successful resolution of current economic pressures. The systematic presentation of gambling parameters transformed entertainment into political necessity, while providing framework for negotiations that would address multiple territorial disputes through individual competition that honored personal capability alongside strategic calculation about appropriate risk assessment and potential gains that might justify participation despite obvious danger. Pack Alpha Raymond Darkwater processed mounting losses with expression that revealed growing recognition that his territorial authority had been systematically compromised through poor decision-making that had exceeded his capacity for strategic recovery, while continuing participation required resources that challenged his ability to maintain pack security and community welfare through convention. Null economic management. Additional collateral, he announced with desperation, that attempted to mask systematic failure through continued participation despite obvious inadequacy of remaining resources for meaningful contribution to stakes that exceeded his territorial wealth, will be provided according to available assets that serve pack representation in current negotiations. The proposal carried implications that extended beyond simple gambling to encompass questions about appropriate sacrifice and community responsibility, when leadership decisions created circumstances that demanded resolution through methods that challenged traditional approaches to resource management and individual accountability for collective welfare that depended on strategic wisdom rather than desperate calculation. From shadowed corner where she had been positioned to remain invisible during proceedings that officially excluded her participation, Lysan observed developments with understanding that transcended personal concern to encompass recognition that pack desperation might create circumstances that would challenge protective concealment that had preserved safety through systematic reduction of apparei, and net worth and strategic elimination of attention. Her presence represented convenient resource for leadership that had eliminated other options through systematic mismanagement, while her transfer would resolve immediate crisis without requiring acknowledgement of failures that had created circumstances demanding desperate measures that challenged community welfare through individual sacrifice disguised as strategic necessity. The Omega, Alpha Raymond continued with tone that reduced individual to commodity status, while attempting to mask desperation through casual presentation of human resource as legitimate contribution to gambling stakes that exceeded his remaining territorial wealth, provides additional collateral that maintains pack representation according to established parameters. Around the table, participants processed proposal with expressions that revealed mixture of professional assessment and personal recognition of desperation that had driven territorial authority to offer individual whose worth appeared insufficient for meaningful contribution to stakes that honored strategic calculation over simple resource accumulation through conventional gambling arrangements. An Omega, observed Duke Marcus Ravenclaw, with tone that mixed amusement with growing recognition of inadequacy that had driven proposal beyond normal parameters for gambling contribution, whose apparent value challenges traditional understanding of appropriate collateral for negotiations that require substantial resource commitment and meaningful risk assessment. The casual dismissal of her worth reflected conventional assessment that operated according to surface evaluation while failing to account for variables that might exceed normal calculation, though such evaluation served protective purposes through systematic reinforcement of assumptions that maintained concealment of potential, that required continued suppression for individual safety and community welfare. Alpha King Darius found his attention drawn toward figure whose presence had been systematically ignored by other participants, despite growing significance within negotiation that would determine territorial relationships through gambling results that affected multiple pack boundaries and resource allocation that served strategic objectives requiring comprehensive assessment rather than tradition. Al evaluation. Present her, he commanded with authority that transformed suggestion into requirement, while his tone carried professional interest that exceeded casual acknowledgement of desperate proposal, recognition that evaluation required direct assessment rather than assumption, based on conventional understanding of Omega worth and appropriate contribution to high-stakes negotiations. Lysan approached table with composure that transcended circumstances while maintaining dignity that honored individual worth, despite reduction to commodity status within negotiations that challenged personal autonomy through systematic treatment as resource, rather than person whose welfare demanded consideration beyond utilitarian calculation about gambling contribution and strategic value. Up close, Alpha King Darius discovered that conventional assessment had failed to account for characteristics that operated beyond surface evaluation, presence that commanded attention through subtlety rather than demonstration, while suggesting complexity that challenged comfortable assumptions about omega capability and appropriate recognition of potential that might exceed traditional limitation. Her scent carried undertones that suggested suppressed complexity rather than simple inadequacy, biological markers that operated beyond normal assessment to encompass elements that challenged conventional understanding of omega presentation, while maintaining careful concealment of characteristics that might attract unwanted investigation from authorities whose attention could prove dangerous. "Interesting," he murmured with tone that suggested professional assessment rather than casual observation. Recognition that individual whose presence had been systematically dismissed possessed qualities that exceeded conventional evaluation while serving strategic thinking that honored comprehensive analysis over traditional assumption about appropriate worth and legitimate contribution. The systematic evaluation revealed characteristics that operated beyond normal parameters while maintaining careful concealment that suggested deliberate suppression rather than natural limitation, evidence of complexity that challenged comfortable assumptions about omega capability, while providing foundation for assessment that transcended surface evaluation to encompass potential significance. "The wager stands," Alpha Raymond announced with finality, that attempted to mask desperation through confident presentation of proposal that would resolve immediate crisis while eliminating problematic individual whose presence reminded leadership of obligations they preferred to forget through convenient disposal disguised as strategic contribution. Alpha King Darius processed offer with expression that revealed systematic calculation about strategic value that extended beyond immediate gambling stakes to encompass longer-term assessment of acquisition that might serve purposes beyond simple entertainment through recognition of potential that operated according to different mathematical evaluation than conventional wisdom suggested. "Accepted," he replied with authority that transformed negotiation into commitment, while his attention remained fixed on individual whose presence had attracted royal interest through characteristics that challenged traditional assessment of omega worth and appropriate recognition of capability that might exceed normal limitations through suppressed potential. The card that determined ownership fell with precision that honored chance while serving strategic calculation, royal victory that had been achieved through capability that transcended simple luck to encompass comprehensive assessment of opponent weakness and systematic exploitation of desperation that had driven territorial authority beyond sustainable gambling parameters. A round table that had witnessed transfer of individual from pack authority to royal ownership, participants processed results with expressions that revealed recognition of systematic failure, alongside growing awareness that Alpha King had acquired resource whose significance might exceed conventional assessment through characteristics that operated beyond normal evaluation of omega worth and appropriate contribution. But even as gambling concluded according to established parameters while serving political necessity through territorial dispute resolution, awareness developed that transaction had introduced variables that might challenge comfortable assumptions about power distribution and appropriate recognition of capability that operated beyond conventional limitation to serve purposes that exceeded simple resource acquisition. The Omega, whose presence had been systematically dismissed, was about to discover whether royal authority possessed capability for recognizing suppressed potential, while the King, whose territorial control depended on comprehensive threat assessment, would encounter challenge to conventional evaluation through individual whose concealed significance might prove greater than anything normal calculate. Ion could encompass or administrative convenience could manage through traditional approaches. In growing recognition that single gambling transaction had acquired resource whose potential exceeded conventional assessment, forces would soon converge that would test whether protective concealment could withstand royal investigation while serving strategic objectives that honored comprehensive evaluation over comfortable assumption about eliminated bloodlines and appropriate magical capability. Tie that challenged established order through unauthorized potential. The royal palace possessed architecture that testified to centuries of accumulated authority through systematic demonstration of power that operated beyond simple intimidation to encompass comprehensive assertion of territorial control, environment where authority was expressed through grandeur that honored strategic thinking alongside traditional hierarchy, while maintaining appropriate dignity or governance that served multiple pact territories according to established protocols. Ancient stones had been quarried from mountains that possessed magical significance, while construction methods had incorporated protective wards that operated beyond conventional defense systems to encompass comprehensive magical security that honored royal bloodline capabilities alongside territorial necessity for maintaining authority against challenges that might emerge from supernatural source. As rather than simple political opposition, Lysan found herself assigned quarters that reflected her acquired status as royal property rather than acknowledged individual, chambers designed to provide basic accommodation while maintaining clear distinction between ownership and recognition that honored administrative convenience over personal dignity through systematic reduction of worth to functional utility within household structure. The room possessed adequate furnishing that served practical necessity while avoiding luxury that might suggest recognition beyond commodity status, environment that honored efficiency over comfort while providing foundation for residence that acknowledged ownership without implying acknowledgement of individual significance that might challenge established hierarchy through inappropriate elevation and of acquired resource. Your responsibilities, explained household steward Marcus Greystone, with professional detachment that reduced individual to administrative function while maintaining systematic approach to resource management that honored royal authority through proper classification of acquired assets according to established protocols, include maintenance duties that serve palace operations according to Stan. Guard parameters for unranked personnel. The assignment reflected conventional assessment that operated according to surface evaluation, while failing to account for capabilities that might exceed normal expectation, though such systematic underestimation served protective purposes through continued concealment of potential that required suppression for individual safety and community welfare that depended on maintaining comfortable assumptions. Throughout initial weeks that established routine according to administrative convenience rather than recognition of individual capability, Lysan performed assigned duties with competence that exceeded expectation while maintaining careful concealment of characteristics that might attract unwanted attention from authorities whose investigation could prove dangerous for protective measures that preserved safety through systematic suppression. Royal staff members processed her presence with mixture of curiosity and dismissal that reflected conventional understanding of Omega worth, alongside growing awareness that individual whose acquisition had resulted from gambling desperation possessed qualities that challenged traditional assessment while suggesting complexity that operated beyond normal parameters for household personnel classification. Strange, observed kitchen supervisor Elena Brightwater, with tone that mixed professional assessment with personal recognition of anomalies that challenged conventional understanding. The preservation wards respond differently when she handles ceremonial preparations, almost like they recognize something that exceeds normal capability. The systematic observation revealed evidence of supernatural interaction that operated beyond coincidence while maintaining careful concealment that suggested suppressed potential rather than natural limitation, characteristics that honored protective magic while providing foundation for awareness that transcended conventional assessment of Omega capability and appropriate recognition of magical significance. In Royal Library, where ancient texts documented pack histories that encompassed territorial development alongside magical traditions that had shaped regional authority through systematic cultivation of supernatural capability, artifacts responded to her presence with resonance that exceeded normal interaction, while suggesting connection to bloodlines that had been officially eliminated through high historical purges. The Ashworth genealogies, noted Chief Archivist Theodore Blackwood, with growing recognition of patterns that connected individual presence to historical documents that had been preserved despite official elimination of associated bloodlines, contain references to magical traditions that were systematically suppressed during territorial consolidation processes that eliminated unauthorized supernatural capability. The archival investigation revealed connections that challenged comfortable assumptions about eliminated bloodlines, while providing evidence of heritage that possessed significance beyond anything conventional assessment might suggest through traditional evaluation of Omega worth and appropriate recognition of magical potential that operated according to different parameters than normal limitati. Ancient wards that protected royal chambers from supernatural intrusion demonstrated increased effectiveness when she performed cleaning duties in proximity to magical security systems. Enhancement that exceeded normal interaction while suggesting compatibility with protective magic that honored legitimate authority, rather than challenging established order through unauthorized supernatural capability that might threaten territorial stability. The throne room wards, reported Royal Guardian Captain Sarah Ironhold, with professional concern that honored security protocol alongside growing awareness of anomalies that required investigation. Register her presence as authorized rather than neutral, classification that should be impossible for acquired personnel whose background lacks appropriate magical credentials for recognition by active systems. The systematic documentation of supernatural responses created pattern that challenged conventional assessment while providing evidence of characteristics that operated beyond normal Omega capability through suppressed potential that honored protective concealment alongside legitimate authority recognition that transcended surface evaluation to encompass deeper verification of appropriate bloodline connection and magical significance. Alpha King Darius processed accumulating reports with expression that revealed systematic calculation about individual whose acquisition had been intended as gambling prize rather than strategic asset, recognition that conventional assessment had failed to account for variables that might exceed normal evaluation, while serving purposes that honored comprehensive investigation over comfortable assumption about Omega limitation. His royal chambers provided privacy for contemplation that transcended administrative convenience to encompass strategic thinking about implications that extended beyond simple household management, while serving territorial authority through comprehensive assessment of potential that might affect long-term security, an appropriate response to supernatural capability that challenged traditional limitation. Summon her, he commanded with authority that transformed administrative convenience into royal requirement, while his tone carried professional interest that honored systematic investigation over casual curiosity about individual whose presence had attracted attention through characteristics that exceeded conventional evaluation of Omega worth and appropriate recognition of potential. The private audience represented opportunity for direct assessment that transcended second-hand observation, while providing foundation for evaluation that honored royal capability for recognizing supernatural significance that operated beyond normal detection methods through inherited gifts that had been enhanced rather than suppressed during developmental years. Lysan approached royal presence with composure that transcended circumstances, while maintaining dignity that honored individual worth, despite systematic reduction to commodity status, within structures that challenged personal autonomy, through ownership that prioritized administrative convenience over recognition of human value, that demanded consideration beyond utilitarian calculation. The wards recognize you, Alpha King Darius observed with directness that eliminated preliminary conversation, while focusing attention on anomalies that required explanation beyond conventional assessment of Omega capability. Response that suggests bloodline connection to magical traditions that have been officially eliminated through historical purges that addressed unauthorized supernatural capability. The royal investigation demonstrated awareness that exceeded normal administrative oversight, while serving strategic thinking that honored comprehensive evaluation over comfortable assumption. Recognition that individual whose presence had been systematically dismissed possessed characteristics that might affect territorial security through suppressed potential that challenged traditional limita. Tyan, tell me, he continued with authority that demanded honesty rather than comfortable deception, while his tone carried implications that extended beyond casual curiosity to encompass systematic investigation of potential threat or asset that might serve strategic objectives. About heritage that operates beyond conventional Omega presentation, through characteristics that suggest deliberate concealment rather than natural limitation. The direct questioning represented moment when protective concealment would be tested against royal authority whose capability exceeded normal detection methods, while serving strategic necessity that honored comprehensive assessment over comfortable assumption about eliminated bloodlines and appropriate recognition of magical significance that might affect territorial stability. In recognition that systematic suppression might prove inadequate against investigation that operated according to enhanced capability rather than conventional limitation, truth would be revealed that challenged decades of protective concealment while serving strategic purposes that transcended individual safety to encompass broader implications for territorial authority and appropriate response to supernatural potential. The Omega, whose presence had been systematically dismissed, would discover whether royal protection might prove superior to pack concealment, while the king, whose territorial control required comprehensive threat assessment, would encounter revelation that challenged comfortable assumptions about eliminated bloodlines while providing opportunity for strategic advantage through recognition of capability that exceeded conventional evaluation. My family, Lysan replied, with careful honesty that honored protective necessity while acknowledging royal authority that demanded truth rather than continued deception, possessed connections to magical traditions that required suppression for community safety through systematic concealment of heritage that might attract investigation from authorities whose attention could prove catastrophic. The admission carried implications that extended beyond simple confession to encompass systematic revelation of potential that had been preserved through decades of protective concealment, while serving strategic calculation about appropriate recognition that honored royal capability for evaluation that transcended conventional limitation to encompass comprehensive assessment of supernatural significance. Around them, royal chambers that had witnessed countless negotiations involving territorial authority and strategic calculation would soon accommodate truth that challenged fundamental assumptions about power distribution, while serving recognition that authentic capability operated beyond conventional hierarchy to encompass bloodline connections that possessed significance far exceeding anything normal assessment might suggest. Ancient magic that had been suppressed through protective necessity was about to encounter royal authority whose capability might prove sufficient for recognizing potential that had been carefully concealed, while systematic investigation would reveal whether decades of protective measures had preserved safety or merely delayed inevitable discovery that would challenge established order through Dalposawab. Unauthorized supernatural capability. The revelation that had emerged through systematic investigation possessed implications that extended far beyond individual discovery to encompass fundamental questions about territorial authority and appropriate response to supernatural capability that challenged comfortable assumptions about eliminated bloodlines while serving strategic necessity that honored comprehensive assessment over trading. Tyenal limitation of magical recognition and legitimate power distribution. Alpha King Darius processed admission with expression that revealed calculation transcending simple curiosity to encompass strategic thinking about acquisition that might serve purposes beyond initial gambling victory, recognition that conventional assessment had failed to account for potential that operated according to different mathematical evaluation than comfortable assumptions suggested through surface evaluation of omega worth. The Ashworth lineage, he observed with authority that demonstrated comprehensive knowledge of historical records despite official elimination of associated documentation, possessed mastery over protective magic that served territorial defense through methods that exceeded normal capability, while maintaining systematic concealment of power that operated beyond conventional detection until circus. Mistances required revelation for community survival. The royal acknowledgement of heritage that had been officially erased revealed investigation that transcended casual administrative oversight to encompass systematic research about bloodlines that possessed significance for territorial security, recognition that individual whose presence had attracted attention through supernatural responses represented connection to magical traditions that might serve strategic objectives. Your family survived purges that eliminated unauthorized magical capability, he continued with directness that honored systematic evaluation over comfortable deception, while his tone carried implications that suggested strategic thinking about appropriate response to discovery that challenged established assumptions through concealment methods that preserved potential while rendering it undetectable by conventional investigation that operated according to normal parameters. The comprehensive understanding demonstrated royal capability that exceeded simple authority to encompass magical assessment that honored inherited gifts alongside strategic necessity for recognizing threats or assets that might affect territorial stability through supernatural means that challenged traditional approaches to security and appropriate resource management that served community action. The question, Alpha King Darius announced with tone that transformed discussion into strategic calculation, while maintaining royal authority that demanded honest response rather than continued concealment, concerns whether suppressed potential serves territorial protection or represents challenge to established order that requires different management approach than simple household assignment. The systematic evaluation revealed awareness that individual whose acquisition had resulted from gambling desperation possessed capability that might exceed any assessment based on conventional omega limitation, while serving strategic objectives that honored comprehensive evaluation over comfortable assumption about appropriate power distribution and legitimate recognition of magical significance. E. Ancient wards respond to your presence, he noted with professional observation, that honored evidence over assumption, while providing foundation for assessment that transcended surface evaluation. Because protective magic recognizes bloodline authority that operates beyond current suppression to encompass hereditary connection to magical traditions that shaped territorial development. The direct acknowledgement of supernatural interaction represented royal recognition of potential that challenged systematic concealment while serving strategic thinking that honored comprehensive investigation over comfortable dismissal of anomalies that might indicate significant variables affecting territorial security and appropriate response to magical capability. In private chambers where royal authority could operate beyond formal protocol, while maintaining appropriate dignity for negotiations that required systematic assessment of strategic implications, conversation would address fundamental questions about heritage revelation and its appropriate integration within territorial structure that honored both individual capability and community welfare. "Show me," he commanded with authority that transformed request into requirement, while his tone carried professional interest that honored magical assessment over conventional limitation. Recognition that direct demonstration would provide evidence that transcended second-hand observation to encompass comprehensive evaluation of actual capability rather than suppressed potential. The royal requirement represented moment when protective concealment would be completely abandoned in favor of revelation that honored systematic investigation, while serving strategic necessity that transcended individual safety to encompass broader implications for territorial authority and appropriate recognition of magical significance that operated beyond normal parameters. Lysan approached ornate mirror that had been crafted through methods incorporating protective magic while serving royal chambers that required enhanced security against supernatural intrusion. Surface that possessed capability for responding to legitimate magical authority through recognition systems that honored hereditary connection to bloodlines that had shaped territorial development. Her reflection wavered as suppressed potential encountered recognition system that operated according to different parameters than conventional limitation, magical interaction that honored authentic heritage, while serving systematic revelation of capability that had been preserved through decades of protective concealment, despite official elimination of associated bloodlines. Ancient seals that had maintained suppression began dissolving under influence of royal authority that possessed capability for recognizing legitimate magical heritage while serving strategic necessity that honored comprehensive assessment over comfortable assumption about eliminated supernatural capability and appropriate power distribution that challenged established hierarchy. The transformation that emerged through systematic dissolution of protective concealment revealed characteristics that exceeded anything conventional omega assessment might suggest, while serving recognition that authentic capability operated beyond surface evaluation to encompass hereditary connection to magical traditions that possessed significance for territorial security and community protecti. Eon. Her scent shifted to encompass undertones that suggested noble bloodline rather than common heritage, biological markers that honored legitimate authority while providing evidence of suppressed potential that had been preserved through protective magic designed to prevent detection by conventional investigation methods that operated according to normal parameters for identifying supernatural capae. Ability. Alpha heritage, Alpha King Darius observed with tone that mixed professional assessment with growing recognition of acquisition that exceeded any calculation based on gambling victory, systematic evaluation that revealed individual whose presence represented connection to bloodlines that possessed significance far beyond anything initial assessment might suggest through traditional evaluation. The revelation carried implications that extended beyond simple heritage recognition to encompass fundamental questions about territorial authority and appropriate integration of capability that had been systematically concealed while serving strategic objectives that honored comprehensive evaluation over comfortable assumption about eliminated bloodlines and legitimate magical significance. Physical transformation continued as protective suppression encountered royal authority that possessed capability for recognizing authentic potential, while serving systematic revelation that honored hereditary connection over performed inadequacy characteristics that commanded attention through demonstration rather than concealment, that had preserved safety through strategic reduction of apparent worth. Her posture straightened to reflect confidence that transcended circumstances while maintaining dignity, that honored individual worth beyond systematic reduction to commodity status, presence that commanded recognition through authentic authority rather than demonstrated weakness, that had served protective purposes through careful management of social interaction. The Ashworth bloodline possessed hereditary connection to protective magic that served territorial defense. Alpha King Darius continued with systematic presentation of historical knowledge that revealed comprehensive research despite official elimination of documentation, while their elimination was orchestrated through political necessity that prioritized territorial consolidation over acknowledgement of legitimate magical authority. The royal explanation provided context that transcended simple heritage recognition to encompass systematic understanding of political forces that had shaped territorial development, while serving acknowledgement that individual whose presence had attracted attention represented survivor of bloodline elimination that had been designed to prevent challenge to established order. Your survival? He noted with recognition that honored strategic thinking over casual observation, while serving comprehensive assessment of implications that extended beyond individual discovery, represents preservation of magical capability that might serve territorial protection through methods that exceed conventional defense systems, while honoring legitimate authority over unauthorized challenge. The systematic evaluation revealed strategic thinking that transcended simple acquisition to encompass calculation about appropriate integration of capability that might serve royal objectives through recognition rather than continued concealment, assessment that honored potential contribution over maintained suppression that served protective necessity through strategic limitation. Around them, royal chambers that had witnessed revelation of suppressed heritage would accommodate negotiation that addressed fundamental questions about appropriate recognition and strategic integration of capability that possessed significance for territorial authority, while serving individual welfare through acknowledgement rather than continued reduction to commodity status within administrati. The convenience. The choice. Alpha King Darius announced with authority that honored individual autonomy alongside royal necessity while maintaining strategic thinking that transcended simple ownership, concerns integration within royal household that acknowledges capability rather than suppresses potential that might serve territorial protection through legitimate magical authority. The proposal represented transformation from commodity acquisition to strategic recognition that honored individual worth, while serving royal objectives through comprehensive utilization of capability, rather than systematic reduction to household function that failed to account for potential contribution to territorial security and community protection. Royal advisor position. He specified with systematic presentation of opportunity that honored capability over circumstances, while serving strategic objectives that transcended simple household management, would provide appropriate recognition for heritage that possesses significance, while utilizing magical capability for territorial protection, rather than continued concealment. The offer acknowledged transformation from desperate gambling prize to strategic asset, whose integration would serve royal authority through recognition rather than suppression, opportunity that honored individual potential, while providing foundation for contribution that exceeded anything conventional assessment might suggest through traditional limitation. In growing recognition that revelation had transformed acquisition into strategic alliance that honored capability over circumstances, negotiation would address appropriate terms for integration that served both individual recognition and territorial necessity, while establishing precedent for acknowledgement that authentic authority operated beyond conventional hierarchy to encompass hereditary connection to magical traditions. The Omega, whose heritage had been systematically concealed, would discover whether royal recognition provided superior protection to pack suppression, while the King, whose territorial authority required comprehensive capability, would gain advisor whose magical heritage possessed significance that exceeded any assessment based on conventional limitation or comfortable assumption about appropriate power distribution. Ancient magic that had been preserved through systematic concealment was about to serve territorial protection through royal recognition rather than continued suppression, while establishment would learn that authentic capability operated beyond surface evaluation to encompass potential that commanded strategic integration rather than administrative dismissal through conventional assessment. Around them, Palace that had acquired commodity through gambling desperation would accommodate transformation that honored recognition over ownership, while serving strategic objectives that transcended simple household management to encompass comprehensive utilization of magical capability for territorial protection and community welfare that operated beyond traditional limitation. Some gambles revealed their true value only after cards had been played according to conventional rules, while some acquisitions that appeared worthless through surface assessment possessed potential that exceeded any calculation based on comfortable assumption about appropriate recognition and legitimate authority that served strategic objectives through comprehensive evaluation rather than systematic dismissal. The Alpha King who had accepted desperate wager was about to discover whether his greatest victory lay not in cards won, but in capability recognized, while the Omega whose heritage had been systematically concealed would learn that authentic authority sometimes emerged through revelation, rather than continued protection, recognition rather than suppression, that honored strategic contribution over maintained limitation. 2 years later, the Royal War Room possessed atmosphere that reflected transformation from traditional military planning space into comprehensive strategic center, where magical assessment operated alongside conventional tactical analysis, environment where ancient knowledge complemented modern territorial management through systematic integration of supernatural capability with established governance protocols that honored innovation alongside proven methods. Royal Advisor Lysan Ashworth stood before detailed territorial maps that incorporated magical significance alongside geographical features, her presence commanding attention through demonstrated competence rather than inherited authority, while serving strategic objectives that honored comprehensive evaluation over traditional limitation of advisory capability and appropriate recognition of SUPI, or natural contribution to territorial security. The position that had emerged through heritage revelation, rather than conventional appointment, represented integration of capability that exceeded anything normal assessment might suggest, while serving royal authority through systematic utilization of magical potential that had been preserved through decades of protective concealment until circumstances required acknowledgement for community welfare. The eastern border wards have been strengthened according to ancient methodologies, she reported to Alpha King Darius with professional satisfaction that reflected systematic implementation of defensive strategies that honored hereditary knowledge while serving territorial protection through enhanced security measures, providing comprehensive magical protection that operates beyond conventional defense systems. Infiltration attempts have decreased by 73%, she continued with analysis that processed transformation through understanding of magical architecture that complemented physical barriers, while detection capabilities have increased proportionally through integration of protective magic with traditional surveillance methods that honor both supernatural awareness and strategic assessment. The comprehensive approach to territorial defense had established foundation for security that operated beyond simple military strength to encompass magical protection that honored ancient knowledge, while serving contemporary necessity for maintaining authority against challenges that might emerge from supernatural sources rather than conventional political opposition. Alpha King Darius reviewed strategic assessments with expression that mixed royal satisfaction with personal recognition of acquisition that had exceeded any calculation based on gambling victory, systematic evaluation that revealed individual whose integration had transformed territorial capability through acknowledged expertise rather than continued concealment of potential that might serve strategic objectives. The Council response to enhanced magical defenses has been overwhelmingly positive, he observed with tone that carried authority strengthened rather than challenged by advisory relationship that honored expertise alongside royal decision-making authority, particularly regarding approaches that demonstrate effective governance through comprehensive resource utilization rather than systematic limitation that reduces capability through conventional assessment. Their collaboration reflected partnership that had emerged through recognition rather than ownership, professional relationship that honored individual expertise, while serving royal authority through strategic integration of capability that transcended traditional advisor limitations to encompass systematic contribution that affected territorial security and community welfare. Throughout Palace, where royal household operated according to principles that acknowledged capability over circumstances, environment had been transformed through recognition, that authentic authority served protection rather than demonstration, acknowledgement that effective governance required comprehensive utilization of available resources rather than systematic reduction to conventional parameters. The Magical Archive Restoration Project has exceeded all expectations, observed Chief Archivist Theodore Blackwood, with professional satisfaction that honored systematic preservation of knowledge that had been recovered through heritage acknowledgement, particularly regarding documentation that provides historical context for protective strategies that serve contemporary territorial security requirements. The archival recovery had revealed methods that complemented modern approaches while serving strategic objectives that honored ancient wisdom alongside current necessity, demonstration that acknowledgement of eliminated bloodlines could serve territorial protection rather than challenge established authority through unauthorized magical capability that threatened stability. Training programs for magical recognition among Guard personnel, continued Captain Sarah Ironhold, with military efficiency that honored practical implementation of enhanced security protocols, have increased threat detection capability while establishing systematic approach to supernatural assessment that serves comprehensive territorial protection. The educational initiative had created foundation for security enhancement that operated beyond traditional limitation, while serving acknowledgement that magical capability could complement conventional methods rather than replace established protocols that had proven effective for maintaining territorial authority and community safety. Throughout territories where royal influence extended beyond ceremonial recognition to encompass practical protection of populations whose welfare depended on effective governance, communities had learned about transformation that honored acknowledgement over concealment, while maintaining appropriate standards for magical utilization that served protection, rather than challenge to legitimate authority. Diplomatic response from allied territories has been remarkably positive, Royal Advisor Lysan noted with assessment that honored international recognition of policies that balanced magical enhancement with conventional governance, particularly regarding approaches that demonstrate effective integration of supernatural capability with established territorial management that serves security while challenging neighboring authority. 5 kingdoms have requested consultation about implementing similar magical enhancement programs. She continued with momentum that revealed broader implications of individual recognition that had inspired institutional changes. While their interest suggests that acknowledgement of hereditary capability serves strategic objectives more effectively than systematic suppression that reduces available resources. The diplomatic achievement indicated that honesty about magical heritage served political objectives while providing foundation for alliance building that honored comprehensive capability over conventional limitation, international recognition that validated approaches balancing acknowledgement with appropriate utilization that served territorial protection. In private chambers where royal authority intersected with advisory expertise through relationship that honored professional competence alongside personal recognition, Alpha King Darius found himself reflecting on transformation that had challenged fundamental assumptions about acquisition and its relationship to strategic value that transcended initial calculation. "The gambling debt that brought you here," he observed with tone that mixed strategic satisfaction with personal acknowledgement of circumstances that had created opportunity for recognition, despite systematic barriers designed to maintain comfortable assumptions, was never really about territory, was it? "No," she replied with understanding that had developed through years when individual recognition had inspired broader transformation. It was about acknowledgement, and whether hereditary capability could be integrated rather than eliminated when circumstances required comprehensive assessment of available resources for territorial protection. Their conversation carried implications that extended beyond personal relationship to encompass fundamental questions about governance and appropriate relationship between authority and capability, recognition and utilization, strategic necessity and individual acknowledgement that honored both territorial security and community welfare. Around them, palace that had been enhanced through magical integration while maintaining appropriate dignity served as demonstration that effective authority operated through comprehensive utilization rather than systematic limitation, acknowledgement rather than suppression, recognition rather than elimination that might reduce available capability for territorial protection. The mathematics were correct, Alpha King Darius concluded, with recognition that transcended initial gambling assessment to encompass understanding about strategic value that operated beyond conventional calculation. though the variables exceeded any assessment based on surface evaluation when heritage recognition revealed capability that transformed territorial security through acknowledged expertise. In royal archives where their transformation would be documented for future reference, historians would record methods that had balanced acknowledgement with practical necessity, while learning that effective governance required comprehensive resource utilization rather than systematic limitation, recognition rather than suppression that honored both capability and authority. But in private moments, when official responsibility allowed expression of personal recognition that had emerged through shared experience and mutual acknowledgement, they would remember chamber where desperate acquisition had been transformed through revelation that commanded strategic integration rather than administrative dismissal, recognition that had emerged through investigation rather than continued concealment. The Omega, whose heritage had been systematically suppressed, had discovered that royal acknowledgement provided superior protection to pack concealment, while the King, who had cultivated strategic assessment, had learned that authentic capability required recognition rather than limitation, integration rather than reduction to conventional parameters that failed to account for hereditary potential. Their story had begun with gambling desperation disguised as territorial necessity, continued through revelation that challenged systematic assumptions about eliminated bloodlines, and culminated in transformation that honored acknowledgement alongside authority, while establishing precedent about governance that served both capability recognition and community welfare. The royal chambers, where acquisition had been transformed into advisory partnership, now served as foundation for strategic planning that honored magical capability while maintaining appropriate authority for territorial governance, demonstration that effective leadership required balance between recognition and utilization, acknowledgement and integration, heritage preservation and contemporary necessity. Some acquisitions revealed their authentic value only through systematic investigation that transcended surface assessment, while some heritage that had been eliminated through political necessity possessed potential that could serve territorial protection rather than challenge established authority when circumstances provided opportunity for acknowledgement through strategic integration, rather than continued suppression. The Alpha King, who had won desperate wager, discovered that his greatest victory lay not in cards played, but in capability recognized, while the Omega, whose bloodline had been systematically concealed, learned that authentic authority sometimes emerged through acknowledgement rather than protection, integration rather than elimination, that honored strategic contribution over maintained limitation, the rough protective concealment. Ancient magic that had been preserved through systematic suppression now served territorial enhancement through royal recognition, while kingdom that had acquired commodity through gambling desperation had discovered that authentic capability operated beyond conventional assessment to encompass hereditary potential that commanded strategic integration rather than administrative dismissal through comfortable assumption about appropriate power distribution and legitimate magical authority. If you enjoyed this story, a like or comment really helps. And if you wish to hear more tales like this one, make sure you subscribe so you never miss the next tale.